Hi there everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. A lot of times, political intrigue can be a great driving force in a game of Dungeons & Dragons. Though, with this next DnD horror story, the Dungeon Master used it as a way to trick people into a poly relationship. To the post. Why I don't like quote-unquote intrigue games, and when the DM was cheating to kick out players because he wanted to seduce half of the table. By Reddit user, my username 2459. Date, 2002. The game, Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. The location, a college campus gaming club. A popular dungeon master in a large gaming club on a major college campus was running a Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition game in a popular third-party setting that was full of intrigue and in-character politics. The player characters were all supposed to be nobles that were sent by their various houses and clans to the imperial court, and would be sent by various court officials out on missions and tasks as adventurers. But the player characters were expected to deal and politic amongst each other for the benefit of themselves and their factions. I knew the Dungeon Master and the rest of the people playing in the game, but I didn't really know the setting beyond a very superficial level from hearing people talk about it. I joined the game, but had no idea what faction to create a character from. The Dungeon Master's girlfriend, who was also in the game, was a quote-unquote friend of mine. Quotations because, in retrospect, I have doubts of how much of a friend she actually was, due to a lot of various other things going on. She agreed to help me build a character. She explained the various factions to me, and 2 of them sounded good, and things I might enjoy playing, but I was having trouble deciding between the 2. She then tells me that there's another faction that is basically a cross between the 2, and I could play someone from that faction instead. Though what she did not explain to me was that this faction was an obscure, small, weak faction with virtually no wealth or political power, and that I would have pretty much no room to bargain or negotiate at court. This meant that my character was pretty much useless in the intrigues of court, and my character was fairly promptly framed for murder and on trial for his life against overwhelming evidence that could not be disproven. Oh, but then the character played by the Dungeon Master's girlfriend swoops in and offers to exonerate my character, as long as he renounces his clan, joins her great house, and becomes her vassal. Yep, in fairly short order, my character became a glorified minion of another player character, because it was either that, or my character was going to be executed for a crime he did not commit. Then, as the game went on, her character was always coming out on top in every bit of courtly intrigue. She was manipulating every last character at the table into owing her favors and giving her things, or always being able to blackmail every other character at the table, because she always had proof and details of any dirty deeds they had done. She had pretty quickly maneuvered everyone at the table into being controlled by her, owing her major favors, and generally having to do whatever she said. People got very suspicious, so they started to plot amongst each other without the Dungeon Master present, and found that if they made a deal or arrangement, but did not tell the Dungeon Master, she didn't know about it. But as soon as the Dungeon Master knew about anything they did, then suddenly she knew, and she was moving to blackmail them, or disrupt the plan, etc. They were confirming the suspicion that the Dungeon Master was basically giving her inside knowledge on everything in-game political. Then, after a few months, we were coming to the end of a major plot arc. The Dungeon Master announces that there's a special session coming up to end the arc, and he says, to drive home how high stakes the adventure is, any character that dies in that session will have their player removed from the campaign. So if your player character dies, you're out, and you cannot make a new character. So that session happens, and things are absolutely brutal. Lots of very powerful foes, lots of bad things happening. Miraculously, If the people he really liked, like a girl he was trying to seduce into a threesome with him and his girlfriend, were in bad shape, suddenly the monsters would all start to miss all attacks until they got healed. Now that is pretty sus. My character was absolutely getting pummeled though, but my dice were on fire that night. I made a lot of saves to win against save or die effects and high damage spells. Other players were doing really good at keeping my character healed, even under constant heavy assault. I was surviving in a pretty killer situation. But then, as the adventure is concluding, and we've made it through a number of brutal quote-unquote killer encounters that my character barely survived, the Dungeon Master suddenly asks me to make a Fortitude save. That's a Constitution save for you 5th edition folks. I rolled an 18 on the die, for a total of 24. Pretty nice. I should be fine. That was enough to save against pretty much every normal poison in the game. But oh no, it was not that easy. He then starts to narrate a flashback to something earlier in the adventure, a day earlier, when my character was handed something by a random NPC, and then explains to me that this item was coated in a contact poison, a lethal contact poison. It was a contact poison DC 25 that did no initial damage, but 2d6 con damage for secondary damage, and the secondary damage took effect 1 day later. In normal, by the book, 3rd edition rules, the secondary damage takes place 1 minute after contact. There is no by-the-book poison I'm aware of in either Wizards of the Coast stock 3rd edition rules or in the books for this campaign setting that fit that description in any way. Well, turns out I had missed my save by 1, but even doing 2d6 con, I should be fine. I had a 12 con modifier, and I was fully healed. But he said he'd already rolled the damage before even calling for the save, and that it did 12 con, just enough to kill me from constitution damage. And then he narrates the scene of my character suddenly getting sick and dying, right at the end of the adventure, as he says he regrets to tell me that I'm out of the campaign. Well, all of that is awfully convenient. I was the second character to die in that session. The first one was someone who was dating someone the Dungeon Master was really trying to seduce as well, and his character died from sailing a save against some save or die effect from a demon. Curiously, the people he was trying to seduce were never targeted with those effects. I very strongly suspect the being kicked out was because of a lot of out-of-character politicking and intrigue that was going on at the time in that club. That is way out of the scope of this subreddit, which would be suitable for some other kind of horror story. Suffice it to say, the Dungeon Master was really trying hard to seduce, and as I would later learn, outright blackmail various other girls in the club, including about half the people at the gaming table, into joining him and his girlfriend in some polyamorous relationship. And he was working to remove from his social orbit people that were potentially a threat to that plan. So like their significant others, or people who had figured out what was going on and were trying to caution his targets about what was happening. The entire experience put me off of quote-unquote intrigue-style games, and the Dungeon Master plot device of, quote, if your character dies, then you're out of the campaign. Well, that went from just a bad game to a really dark story really quick. Now, what that Dungeon Master was doing was pretty obvious, especially if the people that were there that would have called him out on those things were suddenly killed off for dubious reasons, with the stipulation of being kicked from the campaign. And honestly, I hope this dude was brought up on some sort of charges for trying to entrap and blackmail the women of the group. But with that aside, I would say to OP to not let that experience sour political intrigue campaigns, as those can be really fun. Though I am with OP that the whole thing with not being able to make a new character and being booted from the group once you die isn't something that I would like with a D&D group. But like I said, overall, I hope that this creep got his just desserts, and none of the women fell for his trap, and that they and OP have been able to play in some good games since then. I mean, man, talk about skeezy. So with that, let's move on to another D&D horror story, in which a dungeon master seems to cater to one player in particular, thus making what should have been a great battle turn out to just be a dud. To the post. Player character kills an NPC without a single die roll after stealing his partner. By Reddit user Cherico Palladino. This is the first of many horror stories I have about this campaign, though it's been long enough that they make me laugh at the present, so I figured it is time to share them. So, we're playing this campaign. The Dungeon Master clearly has a huge bias for one of the players, her best friend who played a Catboy Warlock, to the point of changing the campaign plot because the player romanced the Vampire Lord BBEG, which immediately forced us to give up fighting him without a proper reason. He was still evil. Our characters were still morally against him, but the Dungeon Master and Warlock loved him, so going against him was out of the question. But a campaign needs a villain, right? So the Dungeon Master had what must have been a great idea to her, taking the BBEG's previous love interest, also a vampire, who was by no means a villain, and was immediately set aside upon the arrival of Warlock and the beginning of his flirtations with the BBEG, and turning him into the new villain. His sole reason for being a villain was that he was jealous of Warlock for stealing his partner. So far, so bad, but at least we have something to do during the rest of the campaign. Fast forward, and we have to march against the new BBEG, who had acquired a castle for himself. The party, except for Warlock, who was still a player character, but not really in the party anymore, was expecting a huge boss fight, and never hid the excitement about it. We spent weeks getting ready for the fight, spent multiple out-of-character calls and game sessions getting ready for it, saved all of our resources to make sure that we would be ready for the boss fight, and one of the players even tried drawing the castle based on the information we had, so we could plan our moves beforehand. Mind you, the Dungeon Master was aware of all of this, as she was present during the calls and was shown the sketches. Then the session comes. We run towards the BBEG's room as fast as we could, trying to expend as little resources on the way so that we would be ready for the fight. We pause right outside the door to make sure we know what to do once we're in. And once we open that door, Warlock announces that he's putting a stake through the BBEG's heart. The Dungeon Master then announces that the BBEG is dead because the stake pierced him right through the heart. No dice rolls, no anything. We didn't even roll initiative. The whole party was left with their almost full resources in HP, and a quest completed with a single sentence. I still think about it so often. Well, that was anticlimactic. You would think that the Dungeon Master would be looking forward to challenging her players with a fight that she knew they were getting hyped up for, not just let her friend say, "I kill her." I'm thinking that perhaps the Dungeon Master had a thing for Warlock's player or something, and was just trying to cater to his every whim and make him feel like the most special character. Though hopefully, the game got better after that. But if I was in that party, I would have probably noped out at that point, or said something directly to the DM. Now, before we move on, if you are enjoying the video, it would be really great and helpful if you could crit that like button, and subscribe if you aren't already. Plus, it would make Lucky really happy. Gotta love Lucky. He was the OG like and comment kitty. Also, if you would like to help out more directly, I'll have my Ko-fi and Ko-fi links in the description of this video, as it really does help get treats for all of these kitties. But with that, let's continue our D&D horror story adventure with a story about a player that joins a combat-heavy campaign with a character that doesn't like to fight. To the post. Edgy and mysterious that guy, without the ability to understand a campaign vibe. By Reddit user Zeus Waves. Some time ago, I was part of a Dungeons & Dragons group that struggled with consistent players. It was an online D&D game. Only I, the fighter and first-time D&D player, and a veteran cleric were showing up each session. Everybody else was coming for 1 to 2 sessions, only to never be seen again, with some exceptions, but I digress. Our dungeon master did everything he could to have more consistent players, by basically putting unchecked strangers into our party almost every session, who were usually leaving after 1 or 2 sessions. However, one of them really stuck into my memory. The dungeon master talked with the new guy on the voice chat, and I joined in to introduce myself. The dungeon master told the new guy the team composition and told him about the campaign vibe, a combat-heavy desert sandbox campaign. After that, the DM had to go, so I was left with the new guy in the voice chat alone. I asked him about what he would play, and he said, "A small elf with the height of a gnome, a mysterious man with a hood and ruby glasses. He never trusts anyone, and usually works alone." I was ready to deal with an edgelord in my campaign, though he suddenly hit me with "and he's a pacifist." I told him that the campaign is very combat heavy, but he ignored this by saying something like, "I'll work something out. My character just won't be walking around attacking unprovoked." So I just went along with it, hoping that it only meant that his character would try to resolve conflicts in a non-violent way. Then he hit me with another brilliant question. "Are there any females in our group?" I said no. It was a party of 2 men and a man DM. And then he hit me with, "Great. I hate playing with women." I asked him to elaborate, to give a reason, and he only responded with vague answers like, you know how females are. They always have some kind of problem." At that moment, I basically went nonverbal, as he proceeded to lore dump me with his character's backstory. Later, I told the dungeon master that this guy was weird, but he asked me to give him a chance. Though, as you can guess, that was a mistake. The new guy joined the session with a halfway finished character sheet in Roll20, and no character picture, not even a Google image stock photo. During the session, in a dungeon, we stumbled upon a caged celestial that was very rude to the party and had no intentions of helping or cooperating. The new guy proceeded to use every skill check possible and every rule possible for 30 minutes, trying to talk and interrogate a violent and rude celestial who was openly hostile to the party. The new guy was getting very angry whenever I tried to tell him to knock it off, because the celestial clearly does not want to cooperate. But no, he had to try everything. After some time, he managed to free him, and guess what? A hostile celestial attacked us, almost TPKing the party, and the new guy, a pacifist in a combat-heavy campaign, spent the entire fight running away and hiding or investigating things. The new guy proceeded to run away and hide cowardly in every other fight. In social interactions, he wasn't very helpful either, because he never initiated any conversations on his own, and he was always so mysterious, talking in short, vague sentences, and not trusting anyone. I was constantly trying to get the new guy to do something, but no, because it's what my character is like. After 3 sessions, the trash took itself out. He said that this campaign was, quote-unquote, not what I expected, and I hoped for intrigues and other stuff because there are factions in the campaign setting. Yeah, this just sounds like a clash of what the player was expecting versus what the game actually was. Though, the Dungeon Master did tell this player that the game was very combat heavy. So why would this player bring a character that just likes to avoid combat? But even then, when there were roleplay opportunities for this player to engage with, it sounded like it was up to the other players to start the engagements anyway. Now, this could be due to the player not feeling quite comfortable enough with the group yet to do any roleplay. But, I mean, he did feel comfortable enough to tell OP his views on having women in D&D games, which that alone was a huge red flag all on its own. So I would have to agree with OP here. That player quitting the campaign was likely a bullet dodged. But with that, it looks like we have time for one more D&D horror story. And we'll make this one a bit more lighthearted, in which a dungeon master's big bad confrontation is simply ruined by the RNG gods. To the post. How the final boss fight I had built up for half a year was neutered by a single spell. By Reddit user LordTyler123. Not a bad horror story. The players are still having fun, but it broke my heart a bit. I'm running a False Hydra campaign with heavy homebrew tweaks to make it work. The False Hydra song is mostly set dressing that made the party's 2 NPC sidekicks disappear, while the party chases a few red herrings to find them. Then, after succeeding to catch the mind-controlling mad scientists that I built up as the BBEG, the party fails to find all the people he took. The party believes they failed to rescue everyone and hold a funeral for the NPCs that they can't remember because they failed a wisdom save to recall any details. Then, during a festival, I reveal that the real BBEG is an obviously evil NPC that stole the mad scientist's mind-controlling crown to control the False Hydra hiding in the sky, Nope style. I get that reference, and if you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it. And I could see how this could be a great inspiration for a False Hydra. Speaking of which, I did cover the False Hydra in a video format that I haven't done in a while in this video here. So check that out, and if you would like to see me make more videos like that, let me know. They just didn't perform that well, but it was so long ago, and I would love to do more content like that. So be sure to check it out and let me know what you think. Anyway, I digress. Let's continue. The whole ass moon is the False Hydra's face, and every star in the sky is where the people it took as a mind-controlled hive mind that then fell to the ground as a zombie horde under the control of this evil NPC. The party fights their way through the horde to the evil NPC, but he then summons their friendly NPC sidekicks as mind-controlled mini-bosses. Eventually, they reach the evil NPC, and after a speech, he summons the power of the False Hydra to himself and turns into a disgusting monster with multiple heads, and we roll initiative. I used a regular Hydra stat block for his fight, and had a blast tracking all the damage and regenerating heads. The Arcane Trickster used Firebolt round 1, so no heads would grow after one of the heads was cut off, but the party didn't know why. Then the Bard does something, and the Wizard cast Haste on the dual-wielding Ranger to get 5 attacks with Hunter's Mark on top, so she cut off all but one head. Then, on the Hydra's turn, the party was horrified when 6 heads pop out of it, and it heals almost to full HP. This is the part where the Hydra snowballs with a bunch of attacks, except no, because the Bard did something. He cast Slow, and the Hydra failed every turn. So, on every turn, the 9-headed Hydra was stuck with 1 attack. Then, the Wizard realizes fire damage kept the heads from coming back, so they kept up the fire damage as the Ranger pruned off head after head with 5 attacks per round. I had to give it a legendary resistance to break the slow spell to retain some of the tension, but by then it was too late. The party had its number, so it wouldn't get any more heads. My final boss failed every save and barely did any damage before it was killed. Quick edit. I'm a newish DM. 2 years of DMing for a party that just reached level 6. Most creatures around that challenge rating don't have legendary actions or resistance. I know that boss fights should come with minions to avoid getting crushed by the turn economy, though my plan was to treat each new head as a spawned minion, with a separate token that would spread out over the map. Each would share the same stat block and health pool, but each attack had its own initiative. The slow spell just took the wind out of my sails, though I figured it wouldn't be so bad, but then the dice just turned on me. We still had a fun fight, and the players enjoyed it, but felt that it was too easy, and I've since learned to give any boss a legendary resistance. This was my first time running a complex homebrew campaign like this, and every encounter is a learning opportunity. Well, OP isn't wrong here, and as a first-time dungeon master, you have to expect that things won't go the way as planned all the time, especially when making a homebrew adventure. Honestly, I do really like the concept of the False Hydra, and I've said in the past that it would be a great monster to make a quest line for. And OP did have a great idea for using it that way, but sometimes the dice just don't come out the way you expect them to. I mean, I could tell multiple stories about this type of situation that I've experienced personally, but that would just take up a lot more time. So I would tell OP to not let this discourage you from what you are doing. As it sounds, it turned out to be a fun encounter anyway, even though it wasn't as hard as you wanted it to be. And sometimes those situations make for better memories anyway. And like OP ended off there, every encounter is a learning opportunity. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.